Hey guys, Chief Fruity here, and this is the behind the scenes of Wreckage, which is the 13th song off the album of Wreckage. So I'm going to be showing you guys the sound design and what went into this song musical-wise to make this song. So first off, I'm going to start off with the tempo is at 139 BPM. I just took it down from 140 because normally dubstep songs are at 140. I put this down to 139 just to kind of change stuff up a little bit so it's not everything being 140. So it's 139. And then down here in the beginning, I have this hit on the very first measure of the song. And in this hit, I had all of this going in the hit. I had this kick here, which is the main kick of the song. And on this kick, I put on some reverb here. Just that little bit of reverb, and it really gets everything out. So I have that reverb there. This second kick, which is the same kick, but it has a little bit less reverb, just to really define this hit. And I have a snare in here. Snare, a hat, ride, crash, tom, and a clap. And the tom really comes out. You can really hear this and a kick the most in the hit. You can really hear the tom. It kind of sounds like a note coming in. And then I have this little intro sequence here. And this I made inside of a harmor. So the harmor here, I have the pluck down slightly. Because when the pluck was up, it sounds really sharp. And you can even see, like in an EQ, let me get a plain EQ. You can see how it's sharper there, as when the pluck goes down, it's more dull. So the reason I did that is just so it's not quite like as loud and as many high frequencies inside of it. So it's this as opposed to this. So it's a little more dull. And then I have the filter 1 frequency in here, going from 100 to 0 really quickly. And that is what's slicing through the note. So if this was not enabled, it'd be a solid note. But I put this for kind of some tremolo on it. And then there's some width on the phaser, because I was experimenting with the phaser a bit on this. But since it was not enabled, the width wouldn't do anything, because the width only does something if the phaser's enabled at all. So I was messing around with the possibility of having a phaser on here. And I put the unison up to 9 voices. And harmony is on to 100%. And then I dropped the pitch down an octave here. So instead of being up here, it's down here. And then that's all I did inside of the harmor. I did experiment with the prism a little bit, where I'm putting this on the down effect instead of being even. But even with a little bit of phaser, it sounds way out of tune. So I just completely got rid of that. I put this on to track 20, where I have a Vocodex on here. And without the Vocodex, it sounds like this. With the Vocodex. So what the Vocodex is doing is it's boosting the band values here. It's turning the band type to male and the band gain multiplier all the way up to 100% in positive polarity. And then the reel's up a bit, and the wetness is fully engaged. By default, it's like this. Just gives it more mass as a sound. I turn the draft off because it sounds too much like it kind of sounds like it has a high pass on when the draft is on. So it sounds like there's a high pass on it, and we take that off, it's gone. So for some reason, I don't know why it does that, where with the draft it has a high pass, and without the draft it doesn't. I don't exactly know why, but that's what it's doing. And I have the SG onto 100% here, just giving it some power, as down here it's really quiet, and up here it really boosted it up a lot. And then there's this EQ here, where I moves out these lows. And I didn't really have to take this down, because it's really sounding the same way anyway, because there's really nothing going on in this sub section. It's really just the bass right here. So I just took this out. There's a little bit of stuff going on here. I don't know if you can see that, but I wanted to keep that in, so it kind of has like that little bit of mass there. It's supposed to be like that, so it's like this. So that's what I did inside of this EQ, and that's not too complicated of a synth, and then I just had it play the C5 the whole time. So it's doing that. And then I have this filter 1 frequency envelope fading in, and it's bringing in these chords, which are titled chords, though they are not chords. I titled this chords because they originally were going to be chords, but then it just ended up being the melody, and I didn't rename it. So it's still, they'll be called chords. So here I did end up going out of the C major scale, because C sharp is not in the C major scale. It would be D. But I wanted to go to C sharp here just because it kind of gave it that detuned feel. So since it has that detuned feel, I want it, like I wanted that sound. So I went out of the C major scale here, which it's acceptable. And then here in the Harmor where this was made, I'm going to be going on what's going in with this sound, because this was the Viking synth, which is somewhere in these presets. Viking right here. Though I'm not going to go to that because I did make some changes to it, so it won't be sounding exactly the same. So all the harmonizers are on. Width, stir, and amount. That really gets it in tune there, as opposed to this. I have the vibrato on pretty loud. Without the vibrato, it's like this. I have unison up to 7 voices. That's really widening it up a lot without the unison. And with the unison. So the unison really does make it sound much more uniform, as well as with the vibrato and harmonizer. So if all these were down, it'd be like this. And that sounds really boring, so it's very important to have these in. And I put this onto track 15, where I have a reverb on it. And I have a fruity compressor on there, with a really high threshold as well as a really high ratio. So since the threshold was so high, I put the ratio really high, so this is basically acting like a limiter. So I'm going to pull up a limiter so you can kind of visualize what's going on here better. So since in here the threshold is at 0 decibels, that would mean that the threshold is right where this green line is. This white line would be the threshold. And it's not going through this limiter, but this would be about where it is at 0 decibels. So since the threshold's so high, it's not really doing any compressing, because it's not even getting close even when it's that loud. So if I put in a stereo enhancer here, and you can turn that up, it still isn't getting anywhere near that, and that's because the compressor is such a high ratio, it's really crushing everything when it's coming down. So that's what's going on there. So this compressor is basically acting like a limiter, and I just pulled up this limiter to, oh, I switched it now, but I just pulled up the limiters so you can visualize what's going on better, because this doesn't have a visualizer, it's just the knobs. So that's this lead here, and I have some noise coming in and out, and this is just a saw wave with a lot of noise. And I put this to track 19, where I boosted the volume a bit just to get the noise heard better, so it's not like something down here, up here. And that's what I did for the noise. And this is just a filter cutoff, fading it in and out. And then here in the first verse, I have a drum loop going. And then I bring in this lead. And this was actually made inside of GMS. It is not a very widely used plugin, but I still used it to make this synth. So first off, when I was going to make the synth, I put up the amount to 100%, which it puts it as 1.00%, but that would be 100%. And then down here, all the way at 0, sounds like this. Let's turn this down a bit. So even at 99%, it sounds like this, and it makes the biggest change from 99% to 100. And that fully gets rid of the distorted sound from it. And then I put the wave shapes on Beast, Saw Mean, and Saw at pitch of -24, -12, and 0. I didn't do anything with the fine because that was fine. And then the mix here on oscillator 2 is fine. I just put those to 0, didn't do anything with those. Oscillator 3 is 0 too. Then when these are engaged, it sounds like this. And oscillator 2, it's like this. I put the voices all the way up to 16. And that would just be voices of unison. And I put the detune up a little bit. So right here. Put the octave to 0, where you could mess with octaves here. +2, +1. And on the MIDI and EQ, doesn't look like I messed with anything in here. Looks like everything's on defaults. And I made this off of the aggressive TE thing here, which is the default for GMS. Oh, looks FL Studio froze a little bit there. I don't know how it turned out in the recording, but we'll see. And then on here, I glued the distortion up to all the way over here in this corner. This is basically like a mini effector in here. So when that's not glued, so like this, and with the distortion, and I also have a phaser on. Without the phaser, it's like this. And then with the phaser, and what else do I have on here? And that's all I have inside of GMS. And I put this to track 13, where I have this compressor, again at a very high ratio as well as a very high threshold, so it's basically acting like a limiter. And I put some reverb on here as well. And that's what went into making this lead. And then I have this intro, again, the intro thing, but I added some variation here, where I had it cut right there, just to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. And then the lead is playing its full loop now. And I added in a sub bass here, which is not a complicated synth. It's just a sine wave at really low frequency, as you can see here. I made it in Citrus too. So, and then I'm going to go into the downfall. And then in the downfall section here, I bring in some claps playing here. And with these claps, I just have them playing a single note here. Like in Pure Glory, I did put them like this, kind of, to add some variation. Sounds a little more realistic when you do that, but I kind of wanted these claps to sound a little bit more empty. I didn't put any effects on them, so I think reverb would have been nice. I might have done that now, but at the time I was making this, I didn't put any effects on them. And then, for the rise here, I bring the noise up. I have a kick rise with claps. I don't really have a full riser, but here I have the lead from the drop fading in. And this is the filter. And this is the same lead that was in the verse. So I already showed you how I made this. And I used the same one in the drops as well. So in for the drop here. So I already showed you how I made this synth. Now I'm going to show you how I made this growl here. So this was the same growl I used in Violence and Epicosity. So with this growl, it's a triangle wave here as well as there. Looks like a triangle wave except for everywhere. A triangle wave is everywhere except for an operator 5 and operator 6. And then the pitch frequencies is 2, 2. Then it goes up to 32 and 64 and 64 there with playing rectangle waves here. This wave is more of a rectangle wave and this one's kind of a square. It's getting closer to a square, but it's still a rectangle wave. And then in here they're decreasing amounts as it goes to the higher pitch frequencies, because then if this gets increased, it's like a huge shriek. So this is the same bass I used in Violence and Epicosity, like I said, and I put this onto track 18. So what makes this bass different from the other ones is that it had different Vocodex effects. So with the one in Violence, I put the band values all the way up. For this one, I didn't have them all the way up, I had them right here. And that's the only difference I had there. And I was experimenting with some chorus, but this sounded a little bit weird. And then this is just the filter cutoff for the bass, so it makes this sound. And then for this little thing, see, I just called this a doodad. So these little, like these high-pitched squeals that have been used a lot in dubstep a while ago, they're not used a whole lot anymore, but still, you can hear these a little bit. So how I made this was saw wave. Definitely use the saw wave. And then I used kind of a saw wave mixed with a triangle here. It has a little bit of curve in it, just to make it a little unique there. And then a triangle wave here. And I didn't use 4 through 6, I only used the first 3. So what it's basically doing is, here it's at 2 for the frequency, here it's at 1, and here it's at 1. So it's playing, like what it would be doing is it's playing the octave there, and it's playing half an octave down, which would be right about here. So with these notes gone, it would sound like this. So that's basically what it's doing, is with the pitch. So I'm going to put this back. And then since it's doing this, it's taking it half an octave down. It's not perfectly in tune. And this would be perfectly in tune. But when it's perfectly in tune, you kind of get a little bit of noise. And I didn't want to get that, so by taking it out of tune a little bit, it sounded better. So I did that, and then these are on decreasing values as well. And I didn't do anything here on the master. It's all basically default Citrus stuff. So I just made those little changes. And then on the track it's on, there's a Vocodex here. Without the Vocodex, it sounds like this. So the Vocodex is really just giving it a little bit of mass with boosting the band values. It turns the band type to female, which is running a high pass on it essentially. By default, there's a lot of bass in it, so giving it a high pass there inside the Vocodex. And then I put it onto 2 for like the harmonizing. So instead of sounding like this, it's like that. And I put the wetness onto 100%, and I boosted the SG. So this really filled it up a lot with having this Vocodex on here. And then I'll play you the drum loop for the drop, which is this. And I have the sub bass and the drop again. And then here in the verse, it's basically playing the same thing as the first verse. Though I add in this bass line. And this was in Harmor. This was the Ugly Cyborg preset, which is somewhere in bass. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's somewhere in here. And I don't think I made any changes in Harmor, but I will go over what's going on inside this preset. But I'm pretty sure this is just like the straightforward preset that I used here. So it has 4 voices in unison here. The frequency is going down quite a bit. And this messes with the phaser, is the frequency. And in part, it looks like nothing's going on in part B. But the phaser's not enabled. And it still has that phase effect. And that is in filter 1 frequency. It's on Modex mapping. And the filter 1 frequency is messing with the phaser. So in the phaser shape, it's going on the triangle here. And I know it's not enabled here, but the phaser is connected to the frequency here. And because it's doing that, you can just use Modex right here to control the phaser. Which makes for some pretty funky stuff here. So I think this is a cool bass. And I didn't utilize the phaser, I just kept it up here. Right here. So it kind of has this phaser in it, but not like this. And this sounds weird because 2 phasers are going through it, because this phaser is going through the filter 1 frequency, through the Modex, and then just playing itself again, so it's going through itself, and that's why it sounds so weird right here. Because also both the phasers are not in sync. So on track 21, I put on a Vocodex here to really open it up a lot, and I put on an EQ, boosting some of the lows here, because it sounded really weird when you boosted the highs. So it really needed the lows boosted right here. And then I put on a reverb. And the reason I put on the reverb is because right here, when it has this pause, I didn't want it to be like dead silence right here. I wanted it to kind of go through. So back in the Harmor, on the effects, it has delay and reverb on it, as well as the classic distortion. And the delay really opens it up a lot. So that's what's going on inside this verse. Basically the same thing as the first one. And then the song is basically copied itself again. So there's not too much different here, except for the fade out here. Here I faded out the filter as well as the volume. And the reason I brought in a volume clip instead of just a filter clip was because when the filter got down really low, it sounded really loud. So since it was so loud when the filter was going down, that sounded really weird, since it was losing so much momentum in the filter that with it being so loud, it really messed everything up. So with the volume clip, it sounds a lot better. So it's a much smoother transition to do that. And then the second drop here, I made some changes to some of the automation and the drum beat. And then it's basically the same as the first drop though, just with that little bit of progression there. Then it goes back to the verse, and then I fade everything out in the outro. So that was the behind the scenes of Wreckage. This is a very, it is an interesting song, how, like, it has, I think, where's the bass? This bass. This bass is really interesting, how it uses the filter to the phaser, going through that. and I used this FM bass 3 times in Wreckage, so I might use this one again in a future song or something like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this BTS and the song itself, and you can listen to the album of Wreckage in the description below. You can click that Spotify link to go to Spotify and listen to this album, or this song for that matter. And comment down below any suggestions you guys would like to see for future videos. I'd love to hear those ideas. I like hearing your guys' input on what you'd like to see on this channel. And I'll see you guys next week in next week's video. Until then, bye.